the thing that has caused most worry, particularly in view of Ukraine, but not far from exclusively regarding Ukraine, is the hypersonic missiles. And the fact that North Korean, as well as Chinese missiles, seem to be able to trace different parameters, different hyperbolic parameters. In other words, they can travel over a different arc. And what they will be asking in Trump's United States is, are we now totally a target? The whole national territory of the United States, is this now a potential target? As indeed it's pretty clear from both Iranian and to an extent Russian ordnance that a lot of Europe is now absolutely within range. This is the culmination of the build-up of the big contest of the missile arcs, which has been written about for 20, nearly 30 years now.
Hello and welcome to the Putin Files. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're joined by defence editor at The Standard and contributor to the iPaper and The Observer, Robert Fox. Robert, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hello.
So, Robert, Victory Day, but in China. What did you make of Xi's parade?
Big. And it was supposed to be. It was supposed to impress. And I suppose it kind of did. But then you have to ask, that is it a sign of neurosis that you have to go big by putting a lot of ironmongery and a lot of parading folks strutting down rather absurdly? And the choreography seemed to belong to the 1930s of the Busby Berkeley movies. Yes, it's an old playbook he's using, and it is, as you suggest, the victory parades that used to be held in Red Square in and around May the 9th, the great victory of the Great Patriotic War, as the Russians call it, in 1945. It's quite clear, it was bigging themselves up, and they wanted to emphasize the person that they weren't going to mention, that Trump isn't here, and we're on his tail now. And that's what that's about. And it left a huge number of questions.
Well, just what we saw itself in that parade, I mean, a host of new Dongfeng ICBMs, but also things like anti-ship missiles and then, odd stuff, exquisite stuff like dog drones and other smaller aerial drones. What should we make of what we've seen of China's arsenal today?
Oh, well, defense attaches and spooks and think tanks will be going completely berserk about this, going through the pictures, what's new, what's old. A lot of the stuff, or the provenance of this stuff, was known about. The hypersonics, the anti-ship missiles, satellite cyber communications warfare capability. This will all be studied, because what the above mentioned will say, what is new about this? And it's the refinements, the concentrations on it. And of course, the thing that has caused most worry, particularly in view of Ukraine, but not far from exclusively regarding Ukraine, is the hypersonic missiles. And the fact that North Korean, as well as Chinese missiles, seem to be able to trace different parameters, different hyperbolic parameters. In other words, they can travel over a different arc. And what they will be asking in Trump's United States is, are we now totally a target? The whole national territory of the United States, is this now a potential target? As indeed it's pretty clear from both Iranian and to an extent Russian ordnance that a lot of Europe is now absolutely within range. This is the culmination of the build-up of the big contest of the missile arcs, which has been written about for 20, nearly 30 years now. But the point about it is, again, the thing that wasn't mentioned over much in the propaganda, but is absolutely, it's not even a black jellyfish, it's a squid floating along the surface, which is, what does this mean with regard to Ukraine? What does this mean with regard to the play out from Ukraine? And although the Ayatollahs were represented, the other thing that they must be thinking about, where does the Middle East go? We're going to have another round of Israel plus with American backing on Iran, the Houthis, and of course, Africa. And it's very interesting to me that Africa was not mentioned so much. And this is the big playground. It's a big strategic playground for the Chinese, apart from the immediate homeland, territorial waters, South China Sea, East China Sea, which seem to go beyond the purview of that. The claim that it's in the national security interest seems to go well beyond the Philippines now. I think it was very interesting. I would conclude, and we can go on with this, given what this file is about, this podcast is about. Do you know, I don't think the body language of Putin and Xi was that great. And when they were saying, "Oh, we've run round behind the back of the bike shed, stuck our hands in the bucket of black soot, and say we are all now the same gang," you could look at all three major constituents: Russia, China, India, and they've all got problems. We've all got problems, but they're not immune from problems, and they're not inuring themselves from problems with this kind of display. So I think, if you want to sum it up, it's the big strategic question mark parade.
And do you think, given that we saw Modi at the SCO only a few days earlier than this, it's slightly stolen the limelight from anything Putin was looking to achieve in terms of imagery at this event?
Narendra Modi is a very important figure in this particular circus at the moment. Is he drifting away from the West so much that he is welcoming the embrace of Beijing and, I think, far more dubious Moscow? He is caught a huge population, robust population, stabilizing, nowhere near in the decline that China is, or in the trouble demographically that Russia is. Not that Europe is completely free from that, but this is a big factor, and it has to be factored into any consideration of the geopolitical balance. Now, he's got a very difficult population which he has to feed. He has a population which is being affected egregiously, aren't we all, by climate change. He has an aspirant, technocratic, intelligentsia middle class, but it's, as far as I can make out, it's not yet powerful enough to really drive the motor, to drive it to economic, untrammeled economic superpowerdom. So he's got problems. Who are his pals? And he can't afford to shed pals. This is the interesting thing about Modi. It's, Trump has lost him. He's annoyed him. Modi's upset over Trump's claims, what Modi said about the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, it's really old-fashioned politics and history, that personality-based. I think that they're really caught because Modi's power base is not so good. He's not been winning convincingly with his particular cause in elections in India. And where do we go from there? And India, by the way, in its latest clash with Pakistan, did not fare so well. There were some really big fundamental tactical military errors made there. So he's the man in the middle. And I think he's got some very, very big problems to deal with, because being in the middle, the trouble is that you can't, if you cross the Rubicon, don't get caught in midstream, because that's not a position that's tenable. And that's the position where Modi is at the moment. He is midstream. He can't afford to completely dump the West. He can't afford to completely embrace Xi's China, particularly because of not so much necessarily because of the overt agenda that we've seen here. We're going to make things great. We're going to, we're not going to have a world-based system dominated by American and European values, but also given the undertow of economic demographic problems, as well as environmental that China has got. It's not going to be such a good sponsor, and it does not sponsor for free. It is not a generous sponsor, Beijing, and that is the big warning to Modi.
And meanwhile, the people we did see at that parade today, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, and of course Putin, Kim having these very warm words saying he will do everything to assist Putin. Perhaps the one line in that event that we did see that referred back to Russia's invasion, how should we read it?
Yeah, there's going to be more. We know more North Korean troops going into Ukraine. It's very sad. They've been stating on the wires just prior to talking to you to talk to you, that they will be in a support role. They've had a terrible time. Where the ones that went to Kursk by all accounts, they want, interestingly, as I think we may have discussed before, they want quite a lot of North Korean labor, particularly in what we would regard the further eastern regions. I think it's very, very dangerous. China quite clearly seems to be on top of it, but China is quite uncomfortable with what the adventurism of the Kim Jong-un dynasty. And we saw the dynasty on parade. He brought his daughter. The trouble is that they do seem to have been ensuring, because that's a family that has notorious physical heart problems, and what kind of succession is being prepared. And for all the bluster and for all the hardware and for all the nuclearization of North Korea's military posture, it is very dependent on China. It's very dependent on China economically. So it's a big thumbsucker. The thing that they really should have done, and they extended to and claimed to, and also with the BRICS, the enhanced BRICS system, not only South Africa, some 24 nations joining it, is that they've got to outreach more positively, rather than in the role of robber barons, either China or Russia, to Africa and the South. And I mean the South as well, because that does include Latin and South America. And I think that the South in Asia, and it does exist, the Malaysias, the Indonesias, the Philippines, and so on, would be extremely wary. They'd probably be as worried as anybody by the military posturing. What's always, this shows a personal prejudice. What always worries me is the infantilism of politics that you get with this, that people like to strut around in uniforms. And one of the most chilling things, come in John Wyndham, I'm talking about the old science fiction, or even in New Style, but also George Orwell. Apparently, Bloomberg, lip-read, overheard a conversation between Xi and Putin, who are both 72. And they said, we could knock up 150 years between us. But with new dynamic serums and injections, do you think we each could be 150? In other words, it is absolutely the classic autocratic emperor. It's not that that they caught deceiving people with having no clothes. They caught immortality. That shows that they're in a dimension of their own. And this is the thing, it was a sort of triumph, and the missing bit of kit there was the human kit necessary in any decent triumph, as any Roman autocrat would have known. You need the slave whispering in your ear and saying, "Oh, Caesar, you too are mortal." And that's why it was just, I think that it owed a lot to sort of wonderful surreal films, semi-horror, like the Addams Family. It was sort of Morticia and the gang on parade in a way. And what was so interesting, and it's the strong card, if only the West knew how to play it, although there were masses of bodies there, we didn't hear much about real care for the people and the well-being and the future prosperity of society. Or the nearest Xi came to it was saying, "Oh, we believe in world peace." Well, so does Mr. Polanski, the new leader of the Greens. But he's very similar to Xi, because they both want peace on their very, very own terms.
Indeed. Well, from the Russian and Chinese perspective, it's perhaps succession crises be damned. But what do you think? Speaking of people who, it's not quite clear whether they want to relinquish power. What do you think the message is to Trump and the White House in this? Then, how do you think Trump will be reading this? We saw that slightly odd truth from his Truth Social page. Saying, my warm regards while you plot and conspire against the US. How do you think the Americans are reading this?
I think the message to Trump, and I don't think he'd read it, but I think people like Marco Rubio, possibly even a realist, and he does have very strong realist moments. J.D. Vance would say, "Get your act together." if MAGA means total isolation, a sort of rewrite on speed of the Monroe isolationist doctrine, just defense of our area, you'd better think again. You'd better think really hard. And that's what is really so interesting, is what happens in the next 10 days in and around Europe, not only about Ukraine, but the ramifications of everything else. Because the one thing that Trump, and where Putin and China have been reasonably successful in keeping out, and Trump is in, but they cannot avoid trying to bring it to resolution within 6 months to a year, and that's the Middle East and Israel and Gaza, particularly today, which wouldn't be factored in, that with the Kahanites, the settler element in the Netanyahu government claiming that they're going to annex the West Bank and claim it as sovereign Israel territory. And the UAE, which has a lot of money and a lot of clout, has said that that is a red line. I think we have to take that seriously. I think the message for countries like Britain, France, Germany in the lead, but then the other Europeans are being very busy and more thoughtful in some ways, is that you cannot dodge. We are not in an era of peace. We are in an era of peaceful tension and near war, which was the message that the Starmer government tried to give the British people with its defence review, and it's not got across at all. Absolutely not got across at all. And we're going to go through a very difficult phase, because within the next 4 weeks, Russia is going to try and close off the land war anyway for a season, but possibly coming up to an uneasy truce, but they're going to try and close off the war in Ukraine. That's absolutely clear. What's going on around Pokrovsk, that particular pocket of Donetsk, and we've got to think of what managing the uneasy truce is going to mean, because as one of the people most directly involved in the UK, now in charge of one of the armed services, no prizes for guessing, put it to me a year ago. He said, look, managing the peace, a very difficult peace in Ukraine, is, if anything, going to be even more difficult that we're finding in managing and supporting the Ukrainians in war.
Well, Robert Fox, defence editor at The Standard and contributor to the I paper and The Observer, thank you very much for joining me today on the Putin Files.